What if the world's most important battlefield wasn't on land, or even above the water, but hidden beneath it? What if I told you that every single day, more than $10 billion in financial transactions pass through a stretch of water barely 21 miles wide? Not by cargo ships, not by pipelines, but through a handful of fiber-optic cables resting silently on the seabed beneath the Strait of Hormuz. Now imagine those cables becoming the center of a military confrontation. According to recent reports, Special Operations Forces boarded and seized an Iranian vessel operating near one of the Strait's critical shipping corridors. Officials released only limited information about the mission, leaving analysts asking the same question: what was that vessel actually doing there? The answer may have far less to do with oil than with something almost invisible. Beneath the waters of the Strait lie several international communications cables linking Asia, Europe, and the Gulf region. These cables support enormous volumes of internet traffic, financial messaging, cloud computing, banking transactions, and commercial communications. Every day, banks authorize international payments, insurers process shipping documentation, logistics companies coordinate cargo movements, and technology firms exchange data across these digital highways. They are among the least visible but most essential pieces of modern infrastructure. Recently, Iranian officials publicly suggested that undersea communications infrastructure could become part of future regional disputes. Statements discussing possible fees or restrictions on cable operators immediately attracted attention among security analysts, not because any disruption had occurred, but because they highlighted how vulnerable this infrastructure could theoretically become during a major conflict. For decades, most military planning around the Strait of Hormuz focused on oil tankers. Today, many analysts argue that the digital infrastructure beneath the water may be just as strategically significant. The logic is straightforward. Interrupting oil shipments affects energy markets. Interrupting communications infrastructure has the potential to affect banking systems, commercial logistics, financial settlements, and global data exchange simultaneously. That possibility has pushed military planners to examine an entirely different battlefield, one measured not in shipping lanes, but in underwater infrastructure. Unlike large ports or military bases, submarine cables are remarkably simple physical objects. In relatively shallow waters, they rest directly on the seabed, protected primarily by geography and constant monitoring rather than heavy fortifications. That has led defense experts to ask an uncomfortable question: how difficult would it actually be to interfere with them? From a purely technical standpoint, operations in shallow water require far fewer resources than many people imagine. Commercial diving equipment, remotely operated vehicles, specialized cutting tools, or compact submarines could theoretically reach cable routes under certain conditions. The challenge is rarely the technology. The challenge is surviving long enough to complete the mission without being detected. That brings attention to one particular class of naval platform that has received renewed interest during discussions of the Strait. Iran's Qadir-class submarines were designed specifically for shallow coastal waters. Compared with the massive nuclear submarines operated by major naval powers, the Qadir is extremely small. Diesel-electric propulsion, compact dimensions, and a limited crew make it difficult to detect in confined waterways where underwater acoustics become extraordinarily complicated. Shallow water creates one of the most difficult environments for anti-submarine warfare. Sound reflects from both the sea surface and the seabed. Commercial shipping generates constant background noise. Currents, temperature layers, and heavy maritime traffic combine to produce an environment where distinguishing a submarine from natural interference becomes significantly more difficult than in deep ocean operations. In that environment, size becomes an advantage. A small submarine resting quietly on the seabed may blend into the surrounding acoustic picture far more effectively than a much larger vessel designed for blue-water operations. For years, military planners have recognized this challenge. Protecting the Strait has never been simply about defending ships. It has increasingly become about monitoring everything happening beneath them. That reality explains why American and allied naval forces have invested heavily in one of the world's most sophisticated underwater surveillance networks. The first layer operates from the sky, the P-8 Poseidon, one of the most advanced maritime patrol aircraft currently in service. It is built specifically to search for submarines, rather than relying on a single sensor. It deploys large fields of sonar buoys across wide sections of ocean, creating temporary underwater listening networks capable of detecting acoustic signatures over extended areas. Every patrol adds more information. Every detected sound contributes to an expanding library of underwater activity. If an unusual contact appears, the next layer enters the operation. Carrier-based and destroyer-based helicopters equipped with advanced dipping sonar systems can rapidly move towards suspected locations, lowering powerful sonar arrays directly into the water to classify contacts with far greater precision. Together, fixed listening devices and mobile sonar systems create a constantly evolving underwater picture. But modern anti-Midas submarine warfare no longer depends only on aircraft and helicopters. Increasingly, unmanned underwater systems are becoming equally important. Autonomous underwater vehicles capable of remaining submerged for extended periods are being developed to patrol critical maritime infrastructure, observe seabed activity, and monitor locations that would otherwise require continuous human presence. Instead of operating for hours, some are designed to remain underwater for weeks. Instead of searching broad ocean areas, they quietly watch the same locations day after day. The strategic objective is simple: detect unusual movement before it becomes a crisis. Because in modern warfare, the most important battle is often the one that prevents an attack rather than responds to one, and that may explain why so much attention has shifted beneath the surface of the Strait of Hormuz. Oil tankers remain important. Naval patrols remain important. Carrier strike groups remain important. But increasingly, military planners understand that some of the world's most valuable strategic assets cannot be seen from the surface at all. They lie silently on the ocean floor, carrying the digital traffic that keeps the global economy functioning every second of every day. Protecting those invisible connections has quietly become one of the defining security challenges of the modern era. And as tensions continue to evolve, the competition beneath the waves may prove just as consequential as everything happening above them. But beneath the visible layers of surveillance, controls, and deterrence, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz is evolving into something far more complex than a traditional maritime standoff. Because every system designed to monitor the surface is ultimately reacting to something that happens below it. And beneath that surface lies a domain that is almost impossible to fully dominate. In military terms, the Strait is no longer just a shipping corridor. It has become a multi-domain confrontation space where economics, communications, and underwater warfare intersect in real time. One side of this competition is built around denial and disruption. The other is built around detection and control. And both are operating under extreme pressure inside one of the most congested maritime environments on Earth. Recent developments have pushed analysts to reconsider what control even means in such a setting. If the objective is to protect global digital infrastructure, then the battlefield is not just the water above the cables, it is the water surrounding every vessel capable of reaching them. If the objective is deterrence, then visibility becomes as important as capability. And if the objective is leverage, then even the threat of disruption can become strategically significant without a single physical strike taking place. This is why the recent seizure of an Iranian vessel near the Strait attracted disproportionate attention among defense observers. Official descriptions of the operation remained limited, but the timing alone placed it within a much broader pattern of escalating maritime surveillance activity. In modern naval strategy, interceptions like this are rarely viewed in isolation. Instead, they are interpreted as data points. Each boarding operation, each radar rack, each sonar detection contributes to a growing picture of intent, capability, and preparation on both sides. At the same time, the Iranian approach to the Strait reflects a different logic, one shaped by geography and asymmetry. For a state facing technologically superior naval forces, direct confrontation in open waters is rarely a viable strategy. Instead, the focus shifts toward ambiguity, concealment, and selective pressure, not necessarily to win control of the Strait outright, but to ensure that control itself becomes too costly or uncertain for any single actor to fully enforce. That is where underwater infrastructure becomes strategically relevant, because unlike surface vessels, which can be tracked, boarded, or intercepted, seabed systems exist in a space that is physically accessible yet operationally difficult to monitor continuously. They are static, predictable in location, and critical to global systems, making them uniquely sensitive targets in any escalation scenario. But targeting them is not a simple matter of capability. It is a question of risk escalation. Any disruption to undersea communication routes in the Strait would not remain a localized incident. It would immediately trigger economic, diplomatic, and potentially military consequences involving multiple global powers whose systems depend on uninterrupted data flow. This creates a paradox at the heart of the crisis. The infrastructure is vulnerable enough to be theoretically targeted, but important enough that any actual disruption would almost certainly trigger overwhelming response. As a result, the most important actions in this domain may never become visible events. Instead, they exist in preparation, positioning, and deterrence. Naval assets are deployed not only to respond to threats, but to signal that certain thresholds will not be tolerated. Underwater monitoring systems are expanded not only to detect activity, but to reduce uncertainty about what is happening beneath the surface. And intelligence operations increasingly focus on identifying intent before it becomes execution. In this environment, speed matters, but so does perception. A single incident can reshape rules of engagement. A single misinterpretation can escalate localized activity into regional crisis. And a single successful disruption, however small, can force a recalculation of how exposed global infrastructure truly is. That is why analysts increasingly describe the Strait not as a traditional choke point, but as a pressure system, one where military presence, economic dependency, and technological vulnerability interact continuously. In pressure systems, stability is rarely permanent. It is maintained, or it is lost. As the situation continues to evolve, both sides are operating under a shared reality that neither can fully escape. The Strait of Hormuz is too important to ignore, too narrow to simplify, and too interconnected with global systems to allow any single actor to control without consequence. Which means the real question is no longer whether the Strait can be controlled, but whether it can remain stable under conditions where control itself is constantly contested. And that question, more than any single operation or statement, may define the next phase of the conflict beneath the waves.